Welcome everyone tonight. My name is Gianna Mosser. I'm the director of Vanderbilt University Press. I am so pleased to be with you virtually to celebrate the wonderful volumes coming out of the Critical Mexican Studies series, inaugurated in 2019, and finally getting to the point where these wonderful works can meet their public. I am going to introduce our panelists right now, and then we will get started with a brief glimpse about how each book came to be. There will be time, hopefully, for Q&A at the end, and we have enabled that. So be sure to submit your questions through the Q&A portal at the bottom. And I would just give a small disclaimer that we have people zooming in from all over the place. So let's just give patience and grace and shift if anyone loses connection at any time. Okay. Series editor Ignacio Sánchez Prado is the Jarvis Thurston and Mona Van Dyne Professor in the Humanities at Washington University in St. Louis. He is the author of Strategic Occidentalism on Mexican Fiction, the Neoliberal Book Market and the Question of World Literature, perhaps his best work, and Screening Neoliberalism, Transforming Mexican Cinema 1988 to 2012, available in English and Spanish from Vanderbilt UP. And I just wanted to briefly share, for those of you who don't know, I was Nacho's editor at Northwestern. It was one of my first priorities when I became director at Vanderbilt to reach out to him. We'd already had such a successful collaboration. As you all know, he's an incredible writer and a prolific thinker, but the best editors of series that I have ever worked with have a mandate. They have an idea for what they want the literature to respond to and how they think the field should be shaped. And that's what keeps it dynamic. And I have been so proud to see how this series rolls out. And on behalf of the acquisitions editor, Zach Gresham, that works with Nacho on a daily, multi-times daily basis. We are just so proud to host the series. I look forward to many more years of collaborating. So now on to the esteemed panelists, authors, translators with us tonight. Author, translator, and critic Cristina Rivera Garza is the author of various books, including some translated into English: No One Will See Me Cry, The Iliac Crest, Grieving, The Taiga Syndrome, and of course, The Restless Dead. She is the founder of the PhD program in creative writing in Spanish and distinguished professor at the University of Houston. She is a 2020 MacArthur Fellow. Robin Myers is a Mexico City-based translator and poet. She is the author of the poetry collections Having, Else, and Conflations. Her recent and forthcoming translations include works by Monica Ramon Rios, Gabriela Cabezon Camara, and Ave Barrera, among many others. John Mraz is a research professor at the Instituto de Ciencias Sociales y Humanidad, Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, Mexico. He is the author of many books, including Photographing the Mexican Revolution, Commitments, Testimonies, Icons, and Looking for Mexico, Modern Visual Culture and National Identity, as well as the director of award-winning documentary films. Irmgard Emmelhainz is an independent translator, writer, researcher, and lecturer based in Mexico City. Her writings have been translated into several languages and presented at an array of international venues. She is the author of The Tyranny of Common Sense, Mexico's Post-Neoliberal Conversion, El Cielo Está Incompleto, Cuaderno de Viaje en Palestina, and Jean-Luc Godard's Political Filmmaking. On behalf of everyone tonight, welcome to all of you. I think we're going to start with a few words from Professor Sánchez Prado about what inspired him to formulate this series as he has, and again, what his sort of mandate and curatorial priorities are as series editor.
Mute, yes. Thank you, Gianna. I mean, I'm very happy to be here. This is a launch that I've been waiting for a long time, not only after our first book by Cristina came out last year, but also since we were planning and talking about this series. I have to say that Gianna is a dream a press director for a series editor, because once she gives you her trust, she lets you do all kinds of crazy things, which is what the series requires. I'm also very grateful to Zach Gresham, our acquisition editor, who has been a restless partner in working on all the projects that we have, the ones that we're publishing and the ones that are forthcoming. The idea of critical Mexican studies was to create a space where we could think about, use Mexico as a platform to think conceptual and theoretical issues that are beyond, of interest beyond just the field of Mexican studies. So that is the reason why the series is in English. I get that question often, like, why did you choose to do a series in English? But for me, the goal of the series is to feature work about Mexico for readers who are not Mexicanists or necessarily Latin Americanists, but really give it an interdisciplinary visibility. For this project, I think that there are three important things that are featured, and I think there are different books presented. In the case of Cristina's book, The Restless Dead, which I have here very proudly, this is the book. I don't know if I ever told you this, Cristina, but this is the book that I was always thinking about when I conceived the series. Because I was thinking, this is a great theory book that dialogues with so many aspects of the contemporary humanities, and no one knows it in English. Of course, since I conceptualized the city, Cristina has become a superstar, a MacArthur Fellow. Her books are starting to come into English on full force. But I think that this, even as people will translate her great books of narrative first, but this kind of work of essay and thinking is something that you wouldn't get even from some of the most well-known translated writers. So that's the space that I want to create in here, the place where we can translate theory from Mexico. A second aspect that I think is represented in John's book that I also have here is that I didn't want to do a series where it was only Mexican thinkers. I think that Mexican studies is a global field. John is one of the founding figures of Mexican studies as we know it in general, and also in particular of the field of Mexican visual studies. I think his books like Looking for Mexico have been inspirations for generations of writers. So I wanted to make sure that the voices of scholars who are not Mexican, but who have devoted their lives to Mexico and have given a great insight into our culture, and sometimes in ways that we Mexicans cannot do it ourselves, are represented. And I think John represents this in a stellar way. And also John represents another important factor, which is that he also works in the Mexican Academy. And we also want to make sure that the work of scholars who are based in Mexico and the works of scholars who are based in the US exist in the same space. So we have some ideas and authors coming in this place. A third element is that there is some really, really potent theoretical work happening in Mexico. And for me, Irmgard is one of the 2 or 3 people that are at the forefront of that theoretical work. Irmgard and I, we met each other in college, even though we don't remember actually meeting. We were in the same university at the same time, in the same department, but we didn't really interact very much. But I have read her in admiration since I became aware of her works, and we have become interlocutors ever since. And I think that we are, alongside with our friends at SUNY Press, bringing 2 of her major theoretical books into English, one in SUNY and one with us. The one in SUNY is a translation of her major work on neoliberalism. The one with us is an original in English. And I think that this is the opportunity for Irmgard to get her due as one of the great thinkers of the hemisphere in the United States. I asked Robin, who translated Cristina's book, to be here. We want to make sure that we recognize and visualize the work of translators. Robin is, in my mind, one of the 2 or 3 best translators from Spanish to English working right now. She's also an extremely talented poet. So if there's a poetry editor in the audience, please publish her books in the United States. They are incredible books of poetry. But Robin is a very intelligent translator. I have worked with her also in academic books, and I think that the book that we have on The Restless Dead is unique in part because of Robin's work and intervention as a translator. So I asked her to come also to talk about translator and to understand that translator should not be rendered invisible in academic publishing. And there's a fourth aspect of the series that I'm looking forward. We have some books of this kind coming out in the future, but I cannot announce them yet. Gianna won't let me yet. But we also want to publish first books. So we have 3 or 4 books forthcoming that are from first-time authors in the United States from different fields. And I also want, there are some books I still don't have coming, but I want to publish more. I would really love books on indigenous studies. I would really love books on Mexican American studies. I really want to widen and diversify what we mean by Mexican studies. I want books that cover Mesoamerica, right, including Central America as part of a cultural network. So if you in the audience, the one that is live and the one that will hear this over time, as this will live in the internet, hopefully, I'm open for all the proposals. If you can think about what is Mexico in an original way that is not just the bounds of the nation state, I am very happy to listen to you. So you are here to listen to my authors. You're not here to listen to me, but I just wanted to recognize how grateful I am that they entrusted us with their books and how much love I have for their work and how I hope that my work as a series editor reflects the love that I have for the field and for the brilliant minds of authors like our 3 authors and translators like Robin. So I'm going to give the word to Cristina, who has the first volume. So Cristina and then Robin, please, if you can talk about the project.
Thank you, Nacho.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Do you want to go first, Robin, or should I start, or how? I can say briefly, very briefly introduce the work, and then we can talk about the translation process.
Perfect. Sorry,
perfect. So first of all, I am absolutely grateful that to Vanderbilt University Press, to the editor-in-chief, and to Nacho as a series coordinator. And I want to congratulate you, and I want to join in the celebration of the existence of this series. It's just so important. It's a unique place, and I think the introduction that Nacho just provided for us is very indicative of what you can find here so far, these 3 books, and I'm very curious, I'm eager to know the upcoming books in the near future. Very briefly about The Restless Death. It was a difficult book to place in a more traditional series, in a more traditional university press. It is a book that is in dialogue with theory and in the dialogue with the practice of writing, both of them at the same time. I do work in the American Academy. I'm a professor at the University of Houston, and I am a writer, a creative writer, as they say in English, at the same time. And that places me always in a very slippery terrain, a very enriching one, a very generative one, I think. But in terms of publishing work that is not as strictly defined as fiction or nonfiction, it's been always a challenge. So I was, as my work started to be translated into English, I really wanted this book to be available in English as well. And so I was very happy when Nacho and I began talking about this possibility, because I knew it was not going to be easy. This is not a traditional academic work, even though it has the footnotes to prove it. And even though it is in deep conversation with theories that touch upon issues of writing and community. And it is not a memoir, even though it is infused with my own personal experience as I was writing the book. And it is not necessarily a work of nonfiction, even though there is some pieces that might resemble what we in Spanish call crónicas, right? These essays or personal essays that play also an important role in bringing together what is a personal query, but also an intellectual one. In any case, I have to confess too that I do read theory. I enjoy it very much, but I read theory as I read poetry. So I think this is one of the most demanding type of materials that you can find, and the most inspirational too. I look for works of theory that allow me to challenge my way of thinking, that might allow me to connect the dots in a different way, to argue, to arrange my arguments too in a different way. So I'm less interested in, did I get it right? Did I understand, every single aspect of this body of thought that I'm trying to engage with? And I'm more interested usually in how does that apply, how this body of thought applies to or connects critically with what my questions are. And in the case of The Restless Dead, I was very much interested in investigating the connection between writing and community, specifically in the context of an increasingly violent world, as we were experiencing both in Mexico and in the United States. I wanted to explore critically how could I respond both as a writer and as a scholar to the challenges that the violence of extractive economies were placing on me. And since I've been always interested in writing as a critical practice, I wanted to investigate what kind of tools, what kind of arrangements would allow me to continue to do so. As I was telling you, I've been living and teaching in the United States for a long time, and I was very much involved with a very heated discussion we had not too long ago around issues of appropriation, cultural appropriation, specifically as it pertains to writing. And so many of the seminars and the workshops I was teaching evolved around these ideas. And so many of the articles and the essays I was writing back at that time touched upon this specific discussion. That's the reason why one of the words in the subtitle is disappropriation, which was the concept that I was usually conveying or trying to explore with my students and with people in the writing community as an alternative to issues of appropriation or identity-based discussions around the concept of appropriation. And necro-writing, of course, is a reference to the conditions of violence and in which many of us were forced to continue with our writing practice. Now, having said that, I also have to mention that in its very origin, this book was a collection of essays, a collection of articles I was publishing on a weekly basis for a Mexican newspaper, the name of which is Milenio. And some people are rather surprised that I was writing such a thing. I mean, that I was able to publish these articles in a weekly column, because some of them, I think for those of us interested in the intricacies in the politics of writing and community, obviously this was very much the heart of our main discussions. But readers of newspapers are interested in many other issues as well. So I managed, though, to continue with this investigation, with this exploration, even though I also publish, reviews and different types of articles. But the ones that I decided to include in this book were those in which the issues of writing and community were prominent. Now, I published that book in Mexico a while ago, and the book has changed and has adapted to contemporary times. And this is where Robin and her reading of my work and the work that we did together with the introduction was so incredibly relevant, because we both were very aware that this book had to cross a border, right, and the border between Mexico and the United States, but also many other borders in terms of the kind of readers that we want to reach and the audiences that we were trying to engage with. And so we both talked, well, I guess I should let you talk about that, Robin, but I just want everybody to know that I'm incredibly grateful to the tireless work that Robin did. I mean, we were emailing at midnight. If I had an idea at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was texting her and she was responding to me. And I was writing while you know, flying into different places of the world back then when we were able to do that. And Robin was always very attentive and not only responding to me, but in fact, initiating many of these conversations and finding solutions for you know, specific translations for specific words, but also for structural issues, how we wanted to present, how we together wanted to present this work to English-speaking audiences in the United States and beyond. That was our task together. But I guess that's something that I'll let you elaborate on, Robin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cristina, and thank you so much, Nacho, Gianna. It's so exciting and wonderful to be here. I just want to add my thanks, my gratitude for all the extraordinary and fascinating and exciting work you're doing with the entire series. Thank you in a personal way for bringing translation into this conversation in such a creative and powerful way. It's very moving and inspiring. I want to share also that I just finally actually saw my own physical copy of Cristina's book. I had only seen it in pictures and in the EPUB version, and it's beautiful. All of the books are beautiful. Thank you so much. And thinking about I think about this book a lot, having already translated it, having finished translating it quite some time ago. And I guess I want to start just where Cristina picked up, which is that it's been a remarkable, a completely new and exciting and formative experience for me as a translator to work so closely with a writer I admire so much and in such a collaborative way. I've never experienced anything quite like it. And I think, you know, I am not a scholar. I haven't really lived professionally or personally in a university context, in an academic context. And part of what is so exciting to me about Cristina's work and in the spirit of the entire collection, I mean, I think of Cristina's work across the board as not so much, I think there's often this language about writers who write in many genres as if they're mistrustful of genre. And I don't see Cristina as mistrustful of genre. I sort of read her work as celebrating the total lack of need to think of writing and scholarship and criticism and language in such terms. There's something in constant pursuit of the sort of collective freedom that is born out of creating something when you aren't thinking about what box to put it in. And so as a translator, I think something really remarkable about The Restless Dead is that very thing, is the experience also of theory and practice for me in a new way. You know, it's a book, as Cristina mentioned, that is interested in writing and communities. And in that sense, it pays a lot of attention to the sort of collective work that happens in communities beyond strictly communities of writing or communities within the academy. A very important figure is the Mije anthropologist Floriberto Diaz, and the concept of tequio and comunalidad, communality, and the idea of labor as something that is constantly engaged in the community of its own production. And so what started to dawn on me as Cristina and I were thinking through how this book was being put together, and as I was constantly enmeshed in what Cristina does with language, which is always commenting on itself and observing itself and thinking about where it came from and who influenced it and who helped, not just influenced it, but also helped bring it into being, was the realization that I was seeing translation in a new way as a communal practice, as something that is always engaged in moving past this obsession with the original, which I think sometimes sounds paradoxical in talking about translation because there is always an original, and yet to have the experience of immersion in these ideas that are so consistently curious about and challenging of the Western historical obsession with soul, genius, with authorship, and to be working, to have that lens on the practice of translation, and also to be working with the writer as generous as Cristina, who's thinking there's an idea that recurs throughout the book about how all writing is rewriting, and what is translation if not rewriting, and to be able to do that together, and also with this added layer of Cristina being a bilingual writer, a bilingual thinker. There was a point towards the end as we were thinking about how to rearrange the book structurally, what was most receivable and impactful in its context of reception, where Cristina was writing passages in English and sending them to me, and I would edit them and incorporate them into what was already. And so, who is Cristina? Is the translator? Is she the author? I was the editor, but also the translator. There was so many. We were shifting and sharing roles at that point in a way that was absolutely in the spirit of the book itself, and so that was amazing. That's something I'll be grateful for forever. And I guess maybe I'll stop there. I don't know if there is anything else you wanted to say, Cristina or Nacho.
Well, no, I think that captures the whole spirit of what happened. We shifting roles and playing, together, working together collaboratively. I just thank you so much for mentioning the work by Floriberto Diaz, Robin, because in this work there is plenty of engagement with philosophers and thinkers from different areas of the world, but increasingly in the book, and especially and eventually in the whole spirit of the book, I think it permeates precisely the ideas by indigenous anthropologists from the highlands of Oaxaca. And I'm sure neither Floriberto Diaz nor Jaime Luna were thinking about creative writing classes and appropriation and authorship in the sense that we were discussing in the United States classroom. And yet, what they were thinking about how communities produce wealth and how they survived, and the types of labor, alternative forms of labor that they use in order to remain strong, independent, and dignified communities, spoke very much to the heart of what I was looking for and I was trying to replicate in terms of my own writing practice. So that's an important element, and I think it's one that remains stable, that links together the different aspects of this book. Thank you again. Thank you, Nacho, for working with us, and thank you to the whole team in the Vanderbilt Press. They were incredibly generous. Just to give you an example, we decided to change the whole structure of the book. How many days before publication day?
Not very many days.
Many days. We're like, no, we were working in the wrong direction. We need to change everything. And then we were like, okay, well, let's just convey this to our team. Let's see what they say. And they were like, okay, let's start with this work. And that was truly amazing. Yeah.
Thank you, Cristina. Robin, it's really a privilege to have this book as the inaugural book of the series. It certainly marks a tone and a spirit that I hope we continue for many years. The next speaker, of course, is Mraz. I'm gonna say that I'm very proud of this book, not only because Mraz is quite a catch for the series, but also because I think it really constitutes a new genre on how to write a book that mixes academic writing, research, and a personal story and memoir, and also reflection about the discipline. John is giving his founding role for those of us who were Mexican visual cultural studies. I think he's well positioned to tell the story of the discipline while practicing the discipline. And this is a book that it's a book that came to me. John graciously thought of us when I proposed it. It's not a recruitment, but I'm so happy that you thought about us because it really reflects an spirit of the kind of work I want to be publishing. And that's one of the things that I want to thank Gianna again, because I think that she's not binding me to the traditional academic monograph, even though we will have some of those in the future, but she's really helping me think the shape of scholarship for the future. And a little detail before giving the word to John, if you came in late, we're actually going to have a 30% discount on the 3 books. There's a coupon that was at the beginning. We're going to put it at the end of the talk so you can copy the code, but don't leave without that, so you can purchase all 3 books at the 30% discount. So John, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Nacho. And it is, I am so lucky to appear in this series, which I think is very, very important. And thank you so much to Vanderbilt University Press, because this is far from a traditional book. And I think, I mean, this is what happened early this morning when I was in the meeting of the International Network of Theory of History, was that, you know, we were talking about how historians can write non-traditional history, you know, because as my wife says, oh God, history, that's so boring. It doesn't have to be boring. I do want to clarify one thing. I am a Mexican. I've lived here for 40 years and I have the nationality, and I am very proud to be a Mexican.
John, what about nationals?
Yes, we are binational, absolutely, yes. But this book sort of began 50 years ago when I had just entered the doctorate in University of California, and I was in intellectual history, and I made my first audiovisual, and that was it. I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life, is history through modern media. You know, whatever that costs, you know, I'm going to do that. I tried to make a film for my dissertation. You can imagine how that ended up in 1972 or 3. I made a whole lot of audiovisual productions, which is what we did then, you know. And when Ronald Reagan was elected, I moved to Mexico. I voted with my feet in 1981. But I found work immediately in television, and then as a visual coordinator in a labor studies institute. I entered the University of Puebla in 84, where I made a videotape on the railroad workers, and then I was sent to Nicaragua to make a film with the Sandinistas in 86, films that are both in international distribution. And I thought I'd remain in cinema, really, because that's what my doctoral thesis was about, was the representation. I never ended up making a film for my dissertation. That was too much uphill. So I wrote about the representation of history in Cuban cinema. And, but photo history really began to develop in Mexico around 1985, working with vernacular photographs, you know, not art photographs. And so I was increasingly pulled into projects by invitations. Mexico's a crazy place. They're always inviting you to do these things, you know. And so I was invited to write books and do exhibits, from which I made books or made movies. And we have this extraordinarily vibrant community of photo historians. And I would recount, you know, my different experiences in US academia, because I'm a researcher at the University of Puebla, so I can disappear whenever I want. And my wife, who Irmgard may know, Ellie Bartra, is one of the founders of feminism, and she can take a sabbatical every 3 years. So we would disappear all the time to, you know, different places. And, you know, I would recount these stories and people would say, you have to write this up. So this book is really sort of an amalgam of a study of how historians can move beyond illustrations, you know, write their text and look for pictures to illustrate it, but to use pictures rigorously, to use cinema rigorously. But it also accounts, you know, recounts my process of radicalization in the 1960s and my experience of becoming a Mexican, where life is very, very different in Mexico. Death is ever present, and as Che Guevara said, you only live your fullest when you are in the presence of death. What's his the great director said that about Mexico. Right now I can't remember his name. The guy who's in the U.S. making all these wonderful films. When somebody asked him about how he could be so bonachon, you know, and at the same time have such a dark vision, he said, "Well, I'm Mexican. We're all on the same train, you know, and we're all going to die at some point. So let's enjoy life." And I think one of the things of living in Mexico is that it teaches you the joy of living. The sobremesa, for instance, The Guardian published a series of 10 words that cannot be translated into English. And the first word is sobremesa. And what that means is in Mexico, that's the time that you spend after you eat. We eat our comida at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, you know, and after the comida, we continue to drink and talk, and sometimes until 4 in the morning. You know, and that simply doesn't exist. In English, you can't translate sobremesa. So I think this is an extremely important series, because I think Mexico has a lot to teach to the United States about how to live and how to die. And so I hope this transforms to some extent the view of Mexico in the United States. I mean, we're talking about an extremely deep culture. I mean, if you go to the top of a pyramid in the Yucatan is completely flat. But if you go to the top of one of these pyramids that is, you know, that has been reconstructed, you'll look out over the landscape and you'll see many hills. Those are not hills, those are pyramids. There are 9,000 sites in Yucatan alone from the Maya civilization. And, you know, one of the first people to ever recognize how much Latin America had to teach the US was Richard Morse, who was a Brazilianist. And, you know, that's how I feel. And I couldn't have made a better decision in my life than moving to Mexico and having the luck to do that. But, you know, as I gave many lectures all over about how to do history seriously, rigorously, with photos and cinema, historians were constantly encouraging me to write about that. And so the book is about how historians can incorporate photos rigorously and not as illustrations. Basically, historians write their text and then they look for photos, you know, and they incorporate them. And, you know, that's not what we want to do. We want to begin with photos, and we want a dialectical relationship between photos and writing. We want a dialectical relationship between cinema and writing. And the book also, this is something that I had not done before, offers a whole new paradigm for historians about how to use photos by examining their functions. Because, of course, as Wittgenstein said, the meaning of a sign is its use. And that's true above all of photos. Photos mean nothing beyond their use. Photos out of a concrete context mean absolutely nothing. And so you can determine the meaning of a photo completely in terms of its context. And I also offer examples about how to make historical documentaries. And we have to understand, I mean, we think that history and movies are, you know, like historians would say to me, well, I like movies too, but that's not history, you know. 40% of all the movies that have ever been made in the world are historical. And you can see that in the nominations for the Oscar. 40% of the nominations for the best film are always historical. They're set in the past. That doesn't mean that they're seriously historical. And above all, they're not made by Ken Burns, who is abominable. This is the official filmmaker for the United States. It's almost like Stalinist Russia. You know, there's only one guy who gets to interpret history. for the United States. And this is somebody paid by the Koch brothers and PBS and that sort of stuff. So at any rate, I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this series. I think it's an extraordinarily important series. And I hope that if we can do nothing else, we can teach people in the United States to think about Mexico in new ways. This is an extraordinarily, I don't know any other culture in the world that shares the heritage of Mexico. We have these pre-Columbian, pre-conquest civilizations, the Mayans, the Toltecs, the Aztecs. I mean, it's incredible. Then we have the colonial period, you know, where the Mexico is the crown jewel of Spain. I mean, extraordinary architecture, the poetry, sort of Juana Inés de la Cruz, etc. I mean, and then we have the Mexican Revolution, the first great social revolution in the world, and the first social revolution to ever be photographed. You know, so, and that Mexicans are visual, we know that by all the Oscar nominations they're getting, you know, when they move to Hollywood. So I think, you know, I really, really hope that people in the United States can learn to think about Mexico in new ways. And I hope that this series helps them do that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I was thinking about binationals, and of course, Robin, who is like an honorary citizen of Mexico City. She's almost part of Mexico City. She is also another one of our binationals. Cristina is a binational too. So we have to import you into the US, Irmgard. So Irmgard Emmelhainz is the third book. This one is forthcoming. If you order it now, you will get it in January, but you will reserve your copy. I'm very eager to have it because I think it's going to be a ground breaking book in gender studies and in gender thinking in the United States and in Latin America. So I will let Irmgard speak about that forthcoming book so she can get us all excited about it. And remember that after Irmgard, you're welcome to ask questions. We have a Q&A box that is open. So please start queuing up your questions because that makes it more practical. And we will give you the coupon so you can get the books with a discount.
Wow, Nacho. I hope it does all the things it does. I'm just thrilled to be part of this collection in such a great company, John and Cristina. And well, the way this book came to be, it's, you know, you mentioned The Tyranny of Common Sense is being published in English also this fall. And the original Tyranny in Spanish had a chapter on neoliberalism and feminism. And the version in English doesn't, but I see this book as the expanded version of that chapter, expanded and actualized version of this chapter, because the book in a way came to be in a conversation I had with Marta Lamas about the feminist chapter in the Tyranny book. And she said, you're not paying your dues. You know, you're just saying like, you were a feminist, you were born a feminist, and the battles that were fought before you were not acknowledged in this book, and so on and so forth. And so this book began as a sort of an homage to the feminists that came before us and paved their way to where we are today. And it's also an opportunity to draw a constellation of thinkers that go from Arundhati Roy to Simone Weil to Naomi Klein to Leslie Jameson to Cristina, as the thinkers whose ideas and texts really accompany me in these dark times, you know, of this absolute capitalism, extractivism, and the new populisms. So in this book I summon them to think about the present and to incorporate their voices, to rethink what is at stake today, and to rethink also the history of feminism and the issues that have been important in feminism throughout, no? And I also had a lot of fun putting together, for example, it's not an academic book, it's very experimental. And it has like theoretical sections and more essay-like versions. It has also some art criticism sections and also like more personal confessional parts. And it's a great opportunity for me to experiment with putting on the same plane, for example, thinkers and makers like Nancy Cárdenas, Alaide Fopa, and Elena Garro, to think about the becomings of guerrilla and the role women played in guerrilla movements in the 60s and 70s, and how women's struggle was thought of as something that was secondary to the revolution, and the toll that being women in the guerrilla and having to sort of either become more manly or stay in traditional feminine roles took an emotional and physical toll on these women. And so I pay an homage to these women and take up their legacy to rethink about, the role have women have taken up in the left, in the good and in the bad sense. I also talk about, I think about the book also, not as representative in the sense that I don't quote the thinkers in the book, but rather I interpolate them, I address them. And in the book, in that way, the book is relational more than representational. So I address, for example, Lina Meruane. She wrote a book called Against Maternity, and she gives feminist women all the reasons why not to have children. So I respond to Lina with my own experience of maternity and trying to weave together maternity and creativity and academia and teaching with being a mom and so on and so forth. So I do make an apology for maternity, no? For example, in dialogue with Lina. I also have a dialogue in the book with Leslie Jameson, who has written a lot on empathy. And I think empathy is a key concept and affect that we need to heal for ourselves today. Also, the book is kind of a healing trip in the sense that I address Sayak Valencia and I say, hey, you're talking about masculine violence and toxic masculinities, but how about my own anger and my own toxicity and my own violence, and what do we make of our own violence in this context, which is a reaction to a heteropatriarchy, you know? So then I have a conversation with who else? With Marta Lamas and Cristina and Naomi Klein, of course. And also the book is in a way utopian, because I conclude, I'm also in dialogue with native thinkers like Leanne Simpson from Canada and Yasnaya Gil Aguilar from the Mije region in Oaxaca. And I talk about, I try to have a conversation with them on decolonization, but from a very uncomfortable place. You know, this is a very difficult thing for me to write, because we have to rethink all the structures to reach to this conclusion I came up with, that lives worthy of being lived in this present, brutal present, need to be centered on reproduction. And this is a lesson we learned from the pandemic: reproduction and creativity as opposed to production and consumption. And I also had the chance to bring in my favorite artists into the book. And so I have images from my favorite painters, abstract painters: Elsa Louise Manceau, Valérie Manard, Sylvia Gruner, who's a photographer, Candice Brights, who has a beautiful piece on maternity, and Lynn Umlauf, who's like an abstract expressionist warrior from the 1960s, still battling, and Dana Schultz, also, whom I admire a lot. So their images are interspersed in my book, as companions. And I also engage, Magali Lara, of course, and I also engage in dialogue with the work of Yvonne Benegas, who's a photographer experimenting with the female gaze, and I've actually been photographed by her. And I talk about, this exchange that happened to us while we were taking photographs and so on and so forth. And I also talk about the work of Lake Perea, who's a collective of women artists who took over the Bellas Artes Palace to make a statement on heteropatriarchy that goes very well with the current sensibility of the Black Bloc, or this Black Bloc morras, or these young women who are masked and wearing black and go out to destroy public infrastructure and patrimony. And so what else? Well, I think that sums it up. But mainly the book is an opportunity to draw my constellation of thinkers and to become strong in their company, to think about this present and find ways to be worthy of the challenges that this present is putting us forth. No. So thank you, Nacho, for making me part of it.
Thank you, Gardi, for trusting us with your book.
Thank you to all the panelists. That was incredible. I struggled to keep taking notes as you were all just kind of riffing, but clearly I think the audience got a sense of what animates the series and what coheres these very different kind of texts together. It's why I give him a wide berth as an editor, and maybe we won't tell people about how flexible we are all the time, but no, it's a gift. And I think I want to draw our attention to kind of both of the questions which that we've had come through before. Why are these non-traditional monographs? What does that signal when we talk about our writing that way? And is that continuing to stigmatize different forms of academic writing as not able to reach a general public? And someone else asked as well, who's your reader for this series? So if any of you would like to speak to that sort of differentiation. Yeah,
to me it's my students. Also, of course, my interlocutors, whom I hope they read it. But it's mostly, I address questions that have come up in my feminist class. So it's dedicated and devoted to them and to my daughter.
I would have to agree. Although I think that Jorge Tellez's question is really important in the sense of academic work being seen as inherently I guess boring, square, in Mexico, and I've been fighting against that. I think it's just as with any kind of book, you can have wonderfully challenging and incredibly interesting academic work, and you can have absolutely boring academic work. So I don't think that this is inherent to the form. I don't think that if you have a book with footnotes, that means that it's not going to be interesting or exciting, which is what is implied many times when some critics, specifically in Mexico, downplay academic work and kind of glorify what is being called the personal essay. And the discussion is very deep, and I'm not going to get into that right now because we don't have a lot of time. But I think what is very special about this collection is that we are talking about very rigorous work, work that requires tons of hours of discussion and deep reading, lots of engagement and practice. I think at least in terms of what I was writing there, whatever ended up in the book is very much organically connected to my own practice as a writer and a professor. And what I was thinking of as a natural reader for this kind of book is someone who is smart, who is intellectually curious, who's not afraid of thinking outside the box. And that, fortunately, is the case of many of my students and many of my friends. So I hope that more, obviously I'm not only writing for them, although I have them in mind, but I think there are plenty of people, in fact, looking for this kind of hybrid work that is challenging, work that is responding to issues that are pressing right now, and work that is connected to an ongoing conversation that is at play not only in Mexico, not only in Mexico in relationship to the United States, but a larger globe, right? And I think that's what I'm thinking in terms of the position of these kind of works within a much larger sense of our thinking, intellectually curious community.
Well, I'm thinking actually far beyond my students. I'm thinking about all these people that buy books of photos, historical photos. I'm thinking about all these people that watch the Ken Burns documentaries on PBS. I'm thinking of these, all these people that watch historical, so-called historical films. You know, like I say, 40% of all films are historical, you know. So we have to recognize that there's this enormous public thirst, you know, for visual history. And how can we address that in a serious way as historians? You know, that's our problem. And what I kept running into, you know, as I would give lectures here and there, was that historians would say, you're absolutely correct. That's the problem, you know, but how can we use photographs? How can we use cinema, you know? And so that's what I've tried to address, you know, is trying to tell historians how you can incorporate that, you know, so that people don't think history is boring. I mean, I go way back. 1977, I was teaching a night class in Ventura Community College in the history of the Americas. And the very first, and we were talking about a night class. So we've got housewives, we've got secretaries, we've got firemen and policemen, and, you know, all these people that all they want is their credential, you know. And so they show up and I stand up to talk to them from the podium and they fall over, you know, in their seats asleep. Now, how are we going to address that? So I go, okay, the very next session, what we're going to do is the very first part, we're going to talk about the reading. Then we're going to go drink some coffee. Then we're going to come back and we're going to turn out the lights. And we're going to show photos from the Civil War. And we're going to read accounts from prisoners in Andersonville, you know. And if you fall asleep, then I don't care because I'm not going to see you, you know. But they loved it, you know. They stayed awake and they saw it. So that's what we have to address, is that enormous thirst for history in the U.S. and Mexico and all the world, you know, for people to know their past. And to know it in an interesting way, in a visual way, you know. And so that's who I try to address.
Gianna, you want to jump back in?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there's one more question that I want to get to in the chat, and it is for Cristina. Is genre the hybrid kind a way to confront history and literature in a more accurate and exciting way together with other arts?
Oh, well, I've been very hesitant of calling this practice or define this practice as hybrid because of the conclusion that we might draw from that in terms of getting something that is a combination of two things rather than a dialogue, rather than an interrogation between entities defined by a specific genre. So I'm usually more comfortable calling these cross-genre. And I think I use that not only in terms of what is defined within literature or as a literary writing, but also in terms of history. I'm originally a historian by training. And so I tend to think of what I do as a historian also as a form of writing with its own rituals and rules and codes. And what I find very enriching, both in terms of the production of knowledge and both in terms of linking that knowledge to specific practice, is when I use the tools and elements of one genre to interrogate or subvert a different genre. And so what comes as a result of that might not be a hybrid in the sense of a very stable combination, but a tense and at times volatile discussion, which hopefully will put into question the very context in which these questions are posed. So that would be the ultimate aim for me. If it helps to produce critical thinking, hopefully and luckily critical practice, then that kind of cross-genre type of practice, then it's fulfilling its own goal. Yes.
Well, I only use
Awesome.
genre as a heuristic device, which is to say we've got millions and millions of photographs. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to analyze them? And so for me, it's simply a heuristic device to separate them into photojournalism, into Indianist photography, into leftist photography, that sort of stuff, and then examine the functions within those genres. Because the problem is we're dealing with masses of images. This is pre-digital. Everything I'm saying is pre-digital, because with digital, everything changes. But before digital, we always have to ask, why did you take this photograph? Because it costs money. Now that it's digital, all that's off the table. So to me, it's a heuristic device in photography.
So
To me,
sorry, Gardi, go ahead.
yeah, no, I wanted to say that to me, I don't think about form anymore. I think more about letting thinking find its own shape, whether it be a description of my surroundings, whether it be something I've realized in therapy or exercising or cooking. It doesn't matter. It's just like allowing thought to find its own shape. And maybe it has to do with the work I have done on Godard, which has enabled me to just put things on a single plane and to find the connections and weave them together, a process which I enjoy very much. So, images are also very important to my thinking. I'll always have images in the back or somewhere, that are part of the thinking. Images I've made or images I produce writing, I don't know.
So there's a couple of questions about the framing of the series, and I wanted to get to those really quick because they segue out of this. For the question about the distinction between academic and non-academic, I think we're in a threshold where this is going to be abolished, because the self-referential academic system is in crisis in my mind because of the crisis of the university humanities. That's a long conversation, but I'm in that conversation in more ways than I wish I was. But it also has a conservatism in between a literary class in Mexico that has always pushed away academia to sustain a very narrow understanding of intellectual practice, and also evaluation systems in both countries that stifle creativity for ideas that are misplaced ideas of prestige and productivity. And I think that these kinds of books are starting to blow. So Jorge, your question is very well taken. I'm asked a little bit about the sort of the possibility of this book showing in Mexico. I think that would be for John and Irmgard to find a way for their books to come in. We certainly wouldn't mind. Cristina's book originally is in Spanish. By the way, the chat has the discount code if you need to write it. And I'm gonna let Gianna talk. Oh, there's a question about moving further to the south. I really consider the series about Mexico because Mexico has a very specific place in the relationship to the US. But if someone wants to deterritorialize Mexico towards Latin America, I'm very happy to hear a proposal. I know Gianna has things to say about the marketing of the books, but I also want to highlight, since he's in the audience, that Sebastian Faber has a great book on exhuming Franco in Spain that Vanderbilt released as a trial, as a trade book. So I'm gonna let Gianna talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you again for everyone that's here. It's so heartening to be in community with you all to talk about these books. I agree with Nacho that the boundary between academic writing and public intellectual writing, for lack of a better word, is evaporating intentionally. Publishers in the academy have a gatekeeping role. And so when we refuse to decouple intellectual production, cultural production, activist work, personal experience, but we recognize and respond to disciplinary boundaries while we traverse them and do really different things by violating them. That work is absolutely in discussion in the classroom, in the bookstore. So there's technical aspects to it. So this series, for instance, the paperbacks carry a discount that makes sure that should an independent bookstore like to purchase the book, they can stock it in a way that's financially feasible. That's a choice. That's a financial choice that we've built into our model and our publicity for this series. We're very fortunate at Vanderbilt. We're well supported, and we can often make a concerted effort to prioritize mission and the circulation of works instead of just, a finite look at gross margin dollars. But I do think that this is not unique to our organization. I know Nacho's other press, SUNY, has some wonderful books, has some translations, has other types of texts that bolster, traditional monographs as we know it. And so that's not me being really smart. That's just following the work and the thinkers that I like. Our goal as publishers now is to, provide the content as quickly as we can, as beautifully as we can, in all the forms that people want to receive it, right? And that is a very different mission than we used to have as university publishers. And so as we embrace that, I find it tedious to think more about the shelving category for a book than I have for the inspirational work within it. And so perhaps that has allowed us to have more freedom, but with a very purposeful approach to making sure that these books can reach customers however they want them. But it's an honor, and it sometimes takes your breath away when you're like, okay, we're really going to send this out to peer review. But I believe that peer review is a transformative process, not an obstacle. And I think especially by normalizing sort of translations and other types of texts at the faculty editorial board level, all of that is helping to exacerbate the trend that Nacho was talking about across scholarly publishing. I don't think that we have any more time for questions. I just want to, again, thank you all for your time. Thank you, Nacho, Cristina, Robin, John, Irmgard. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. We can leave the Zoom window open a little if people, are saying goodbye or just want to wave to some of their participants. And
if they want the discount code, which Jenna put on the
Jenna
chat.
put it in the chat, right? It is in the chat, and
it's now in front of us. So.
On the back. So again, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We can't wait to hear what you think of the books, review them, request them, circulate them, show their beautiful covers in this time.
And if you have local bookstores that would like to stock them, please encourage them to do so.
Absolutely.